The video opens on crowded streets, endless streams of people rushing past each other. Smiles exchanged, polite gestures, 1,000 conversations at once. From the outside, it all looks harmless, even comforting. But beneath the surface, something far more unsettling hides in plain sight. Because the people who hurt you most are not always the loud ones. They're not the ones who betray openly, shout their intentions, or mark themselves as enemies. The true danger lies in the quiet distortions, those who conceal themselves behind charm, empathy, and helpfulness. Think about it. The friend who always seems supportive, but leaves you doubting yourself. The partner who comforts you, yet somehow makes their pain your responsibility. The colleague who applauds your success while secretly competing with you. On the surface, they're kind. They smile. They listen. They nod. But it is precisely this disguise that allows them to slip past your defenses. Carl Jung understood this better than anyone. He wasn't only a psychologist who studied thoughts and behavior. He was a pioneer of the unseen, the shadows, the unconscious drives that shape every relationship. And what he discovered is both terrifying and liberating. Jung realized that people rarely show you who they truly are. Instead, they show you what they think will work. A mask, a performance, a crafted persona designed to gain your trust. And if you're not awake, if you're not paying attention, you can end up giving your energy, your love, even your life, to someone who was never safe to begin with. This is why Jung spoke so often about masks and shadows. Because while the mask presents a carefully curated version of someone, the shadow hides the parts of them they can't admit to. The selfishness, the resentment, the hunger for control. And when that shadow is denied, it doesn't disappear. It leaks out in subtle manipulation, in quiet sabotage, in smiles that don't reach the eyes. Jung left us a warning. There are 6 kinds of people who embody this shadow most clearly. 6 types who appear harmless at first, even trustworthy, but who will quietly dismantle your confidence, your boundaries, and your sense of safety if you let them in too deeply. These are not obvious villains. They are friends, partners, mentors, even family members. But their patterns are so consistent, so destructive, that Jung urged us to recognize them before it's too late. And so in this video, we'll expose each one. The 6 people Jung believed you should never trust if you want to protect your soul. When Jung spoke of human nature, he often returned to 2 words, the persona and the shadow. The persona is the mask we wear in public. It's the smile you put on when you're exhausted. The politeness you show to someone you can't stand. The version of yourself that feels acceptable, lovable, and safe to show the world. Everyone has a persona. It's not inherently evil. In fact, it helps us survive. But Jung warned that the more someone identifies with this mask, the more dangerous they become. Because behind every polished exterior lies a shadow. The shadow is everything we repress. Our anger, our envy, our selfishness, our fear of being unworthy. It's the part of us we'd rather pretend doesn't exist. But repression doesn't erase it. It only pushes it underground, where it quietly drives behavior without our awareness. And that is where the danger begins. Because when someone refuses to meet their shadow, they don't stop acting on it. They simply project it onto everyone else. They act kind while hiding resentment. They act supportive while undermining you. They act spiritual while hungering for control. Think of the mask and the shadow as 2 sides of the same coin. The brighter the mask, the darker the shadow it conceals. A person who insists they are always a victim often hides a manipulator. The one who mirrors your every dream and insecurity hides emptiness at their core. The calm, wise voice who seems spiritually above everyone else may secretly be consumed by ego. And the empath who feels everything may use sensitivity as a weapon of control. This is why Jung's work remains urgent. Because in daily life, we judge by appearances. We assume that kindness equals goodness, that support equals loyalty, that empathy equals love. But Jung shattered that illusion. He showed us that what people present is not always who they are. It is who they need you to believe they are. And if you cannot see through the mask, you will miss the shadow. That is why these 6 types are so insidious. Not because they look like villains, but because they look like friends. The very people you trust, you lean on, you confide in. Those are often the ones wearing masks thick enough to hide entire shadows. And if you don't learn to recognize the signs, you won't realize what's happening until you've already lost years of your energy, your peace, and your trust. So before we reveal these 6 types, remember Jung's central truth. People don't show you who they are. They show you what they think will work. And it's your job to see past the performance, to sense the shadow they cannot admit to, and to protect yourself before the mask slips. The first mask Jung warned about is the most disarming, the chronic victim. At first glance, they seem harmless, even sympathetic. Their life is full of stories where they were mistreated, betrayed, abandoned, overlooked. And naturally, you feel compassion. You want to help, to comfort, to be the one who finally proves to them that not everyone leaves. But Jung noticed something deeper. When a person lives permanently in victimhood, when every story ends with them as the one who suffered, something dangerous is hiding beneath the surface. Because victimhood, when repeated endlessly, becomes a form of control. If they are always the victim, they never have to take responsibility. They never have to change. They never have to confront the darkness within themselves. Their suffering becomes a shield, protecting them from accountability. And worse, it becomes a weapon, turned against anyone who dares to step back. You'll recognize this type not just by their endless complaints, but by how they use pain. They guilt-trip you for not doing enough. They twist reality so that your boundaries look like cruelty. They make you feel that if you don't rescue them, you are part of the problem. And the more you give, the heavier the burden becomes, until one day you realize you're not helping them heal. You're carrying them, and they have no intention of walking on their own. Jung wrote that this kind of victim has fused with their shadow. Instead of facing their inner manipulator, they disguise it with helplessness. Instead of owning their need for control, they demand pity until you feel guilty for not being broken yourself. And here lies the trap. The chronic victim does not actually want healing, because to heal would mean losing their only source of power, your sympathy. Think about the people in your life. Is there someone who never moves forward, yet always has an explanation for why it's someone else's fault? Someone who makes you feel like you're abandoning them anytime you set a boundary? Someone whose struggles never lead to growth, only to more demands for your attention? If so, Jung's warning is clear: step back. Because the chronic victim is not searching for light. They are feeding off your energy to avoid their own darkness. And if you don't protect yourself, you will begin to believe the lie. You'll start feeling guilty for your own stability, guilty for your own strength, guilty for not being broken with them. That is the subtle power of the chronic victim. And Jung's message is simple. Compassion does not require self-destruction. If someone lives forever in their wounds, you cannot rescue them. You can only lose yourself. The second mask is perhaps even more deceptive: the charming mirror. This person doesn't enter your life with complaints or visible wounds. Instead, they arrive like a reflection of everything you've ever wanted. They laugh at your jokes. They admire your dreams. They validate your insecurities. They seem endlessly supportive, endlessly agreeable, almost as if they were designed just for you. At first, it feels magical. Finally, someone understands you. Finally, someone sees you. But Jung warned that this kind of connection is not real. It's a performance. The charming mirror is not showing you who they are. They are showing you yourself, carefully reflected back at you to gain your trust. It's intoxicating, isn't it? To feel so deeply admired, so completely accepted. And that is why this mask is so dangerous. Because when someone hides entirely behind a persona, the real self never appears. There is no substance, no stability, no grounded values. Only the ability to adapt, to mimic, to impress. You think you've found an ally, but what you've really found is smoke. Over time, you begin to notice the cracks. You realize you don't actually know what they believe in. You can't recall a moment when they disagreed with you or stood firm on something real. And then, the truth hits. Their loyalty was never to you. It was to your approval. The moment that approval fades, the mirror shatters. They vanish without warning, or worse, they turn against you, wielding the secrets you shared in trust. Jung described this as the persona trap, the danger of someone so identified with their mask that their true self remains untouched and unaccountable. Such people live not as individuals, but as performances, shapeshifters loyal only to admiration. And when admiration is gone, so are they. Ask yourself, do you know someone who always seems to agree, but never reveals their own convictions? Someone who makes you feel good in the moment, but leaves you strangely empty afterward? Someone who thrives in your spotlight, but disappears the second it dims? That is the charming mirror. And trusting them is like shaking hands with smoke. You think you're holding something solid, but the moment you need them most, your grip closes on nothing. The third mask is subtle, and that's what makes it so dangerous, the passive-aggressive enabler. Unlike the chronic victim, they don't overwhelm you with complaints. Unlike the charming mirror, they don't flood you with flattery. Instead, they operate in quiet tones, gentle suggestions, and seemingly supportive words that, over time, erode your confidence from the inside out. Picture this. You share a dream, something close to your heart. You're excited, nervous, vulnerable. They smile, they nod, and then they say something like, "That's ambitious. I just don't want you to be disappointed." Or perhaps, "You're so brave for trying that. I don't think I'd ever risk failing like that." It sounds supportive, doesn't it? But hidden in those words is a seed of doubt. Jung called this the shadow of the helper, the person who pretends to empower you while quietly ensuring you never outgrow them. Because if you succeed without them, they lose their grip. They lose their relevance. And for someone who thrives on subtle control, that loss feels like death. The passive-aggressive enabler doesn't attack your dreams directly. They don't fight you openly. Instead, they suggest, they hint, they plant quiet fears in your mind. Doubt dressed as concern, fear disguised as logic, judgment cloaked as maturity. And if you're not fully awake, you begin to absorb their limitations as your own. You start thinking smaller, shrinking your ambitions, second-guessing yourself. Not because you lost belief in your dream, but because someone you trusted slowly dismantled it under the mask of care. Jung believed this type was especially insidious because they don't appear toxic. They appear helpful. They position themselves as the voice of reason, the one who keeps you grounded. But what they're really doing is clipping your wings before you ever take flight. They make sure you stay dependent, tethered, never soaring beyond the space they feel comfortable with. So ask yourself, who in your life supports you only within limits? Who encourages you as long as your success doesn't threaten their role? Who hides their control in soft words, careful tones, and just looking out for you excuses? That is the passive-aggressive enabler. And if you don't learn to recognize the shadow beneath their concern, you will spend your life shrinking to fit the boundaries they quietly placed around you. The fourth mask is one of the most painful to discover, the secret competitor. On the surface, they look like your friend, your ally, even your biggest supporter. They applaud when you share good news. They smile when you succeed. They say all the right words. But underneath, something darker stirs. They aren't competing with the world, they're competing with you. Jung believed this type is born from unconscious inferiority. They don't truly hate you. What they resent is what you reflect back at them, the parts of themselves they feel they can never reach. Every time you grow, their hidden inadequacy grows louder. And instead of facing it, they channel that energy into secret rivalry. You'll feel it in subtle ways. You tell them about a promotion, and they quickly change the subject to their own achievement, slightly more impressive. You share a dream, and they respond with a story of how they did something similar, only better. When others praise you, they find a way to redirect the spotlight. On the surface, it looks like a conversation. In reality, it's a quiet competition, a desperate attempt to make sure you never stand too far above them. And here's the cruel twist. When you stumble, when you fail, when you face disappointment, they don't just sympathize, they feel relief. They may not say it out loud, but you'll hear it in their tone. "I was afraid this might happen. I tried to warn you." They dress it up as care, but inside, they're satisfied. Because in your weakness, they no longer feel so small. Jung warned that this mask is one of the hardest to accept because no one wants to believe that a friend, a partner, or a sibling could quietly resent their victories. But ask yourself, who in your life struggles to clap when it's not their turn to win? Who celebrates you only when they are ahead? Who leaves you feeling tension even in moments of joy? That is the secret competitor. The danger is not just in their envy. It's in your blindness to it. Because the more you ignore the signs, the more you pour trust, love, and vulnerability into someone who doesn't see you as a teammate, but as a threat. And by the time you realize the truth, you may have shared everything with someone who was silently rooting for your failure all along. The fifth mask is one of the most seductive of all, the spiritual narcissist, or what Jung might have called the wise one. They present themselves as enlightened, calm, emotionally advanced. They speak softly, they quote philosophy, they reference healing, mindfulness, or shadow work. At first glance, they appear to be above conflict, untouched by ego, almost saintly. But Jung warned that this appearance often hides something much darker, an ego disguised as wisdom. The spiritual narcissist doesn't dominate through anger or loudness. They dominate by always being the calm one. If you argue, they tell you you're projecting. If you're upset, they say, that's a trigger you haven't dealt with yet. If you confront them, they smile and respond, I'm just holding space. Your reaction is not my responsibility. On the surface, it sounds profound, but underneath, it's a power play. They reframe your emotions as flaws while keeping themselves untouchable. This is the split Jung warned about. When someone builds their identity on the mask of wisdom, while their shadow leaks out as superiority, quiet judgment, and control. They didn't kill their ego. They simply dressed it in robes and crystals, buried it under spiritual language, and called it transcendence. And as long as you look to them for clarity, they hold the power. The danger is that you can never win with a spiritual narcissist. You cannot confront them because your confrontation becomes proof that you are unhealed. You cannot disagree with them because your disagreement becomes evidence of your immaturity. They create a closed loop where their calmness always equals wisdom and your emotion always equals weakness. And the more you play into it, the smaller you feel, the more dependent you become on their approval. Ask yourself, do you know someone who always frames themselves as the balanced one, the centered one, while subtly making you feel unstable, reactive, or inferior? Someone who never admits to flaws, but instead reframes your concerns as spiritual lessons you need to learn? That is not wisdom. That is control. And Jung's warning is clear. These people don't want equals. They don't want healing. They want authority. And if you let them, they will keep you small, not to help you grow, but to keep themselves feeling superior. The final mask may be the most deceptive of all, the empathic controller. At first, they appear like a gift. They feel everything. They sense your moods, your energy, your unspoken pain. They comfort you when you're struggling. They cry when you cry. They make you feel deeply seen. To meet someone so sensitive can feel like destiny. But Jung warned us, sensitivity, when fused with an unintegrated shadow, can become a tool of control. Here's how it works. At first, their empathy feels like connection. But slowly, you notice a shift. You begin adjusting yourself around them. You hold back frustrations because your energy might upset them. You silence your anger because they're too sensitive to handle it. Before long, you're not expressing yourself at all, you're managing them. And that's the trap. The empathic controller convinces you that their pain is your responsibility. If they spiral, it's because you weren't careful enough. If they're hurt, it's because you were too cold. If they're overwhelmed, it's because you didn't protect them. Slowly, your life becomes centered around preserving their comfort, while your own needs, your own emotions, your own truth are buried to keep the peace. Jung wrote often about projection, how people unload their unhealed chaos onto others without realizing it. And this is exactly what the empathic controller does. They don't carry their wounds, they hand them to you. They demand that the world arrange itself around their sensitivities. And if you fail to comply, they call you cruel, unstable, or unloving. At first, you mistake their tears for depth, their fragility for purity, their constant overwhelm for intimacy. But look closer, and you'll see it's not love. It's psychological submission. You aren't building connection. You're being trained to regulate someone who refuses to take responsibility for themselves. Ask yourself, is there someone in your life whose emotions control you more than your own? Someone who turns every disagreement into your fault because you hurt them too deeply? Someone who never says they're dangerous, but instead insists they just feel too much? That is the empathic controller. And Jung's advice was unflinching: walk away. Because unless they choose to meet their own shadow, you will spend your life managing a storm that was never yours to carry. By now you've seen the 6 masks: victim, mirror, enabler, competitor, wise one, empath. And a question naturally rises. Why? Why do people become this way? Why would someone build their entire identity on manipulation, on projection, on control disguised as love? Jung's answer was brutally clear: because they never met their shadow. They never turned inward to face the parts of themselves they were taught to fear: anger, jealousy, selfishness, inadequacy. So instead of owning those truths, they forced others to carry them. They never admitted their hunger for control, so they disguised it as compassion, as guidance, as care. They never confronted their manipulative streak. So they played the victim and made you responsible for their pain. They never worked through their wounds. So they projected them outward until the whole world was guilty for what they refused to face. This is why Jung insisted that unconscious people are dangerous, not because they're evil, but because they live in exile from themselves. When someone refuses to acknowledge their shadow, it doesn't vanish. It leaks out, twisting their relationships, poisoning their love, reshaping every bond into a mirror of their denial. And if you get too close, their shadow becomes your burden. These people aren't rare. They're everywhere. At work, in families, in friendships, in romances. And they thrive in the lives of those who don't yet know how to defend their own energy. If you don't see the mask for what it is, you'll believe the performance. You'll confuse pity with loyalty, flattery with love, empathy with safety. And by the time you realize what's happening, you'll already be entangled in someone else's unconscious survival game. Jung's deeper warning wasn't just to watch out for these 6 types. It was to recognize why they exist at all. Because people who live without self-awareness, who bury their shadow instead of integrating it, always make someone else carry the weight. And if you're not awake, that someone will be you. So what do you do once you see the masks? Once you recognize the victim, the mirror, the enabler, the competitor, the wise one, the empath, how do you protect yourself without closing your heart to the world? Jung's prescription was not fear, but awareness. He believed the antidote to manipulation was never more people-pleasing, never endless explanations, but self-knowledge and boundaries. First, he urged us to audit our circle. Ask yourself, who drains me? Who confuses me? Who do I constantly have to explain myself to? Because true connection doesn't require endless justification. If someone always needs a reason to treat you right, they're not confused, they're avoiding accountability. Second, Jung advised us to let the shadows speak. Stop performing as if love is limitless, patience eternal, and trust unconditional. Allow yourself to say no. Allow yourself to set boundaries. Allow yourself to feel anger when someone disrespects you. These aren't flaws, they are protections. Your shadow, when integrated, is not your enemy. It is the part of you that remembers who you are when others try to make you forget. Third, stop explaining. The people worthy of your presence will feel your boundaries and respect them. The toxic ones will demand reasons, guilt trip you, and paint you as the problem. Let them. Jung didn't believe in convincing unconscious people of your worth. He believed in becoming so rooted in yourself that their confusion no longer slows you down. And finally, trust what you felt the first time. Most of us don't miss the signs, we ignore them. That hesitation you felt before trusting someone, that shift in energy you noticed but dismissed, that was not paranoia. That was your subconscious reading patterns your mind hadn't caught yet. Jung's advice was simple: listen to it. Because when you trust your own knowing, you no longer need to wait for proof. Carl Jung never wanted us to live in fear of people. His warning was not about building walls. It was about building awareness. He didn't want us to hide from the world. He wanted us to stop hiding from ourselves. Because once you integrate your own shadow, once you stop fearing your anger, your intuition, your boundaries, you stop letting unconscious people slip past your defenses. The masks will still appear. The victim will still seek pity. The mirror will still reflect what you want to see. The enabler will still plant doubt. The competitor will still resent. The wise one will still perform calm superiority. The empath will still cry their way into control. But something in you will have changed. Their tactics no longer land, because you are no longer available to be tricked. And that is Jung's true legacy, not paranoia, but freedom. Freedom from being manipulated. Freedom from bending yourself to fit someone else's wounds. Freedom from explaining why your no is enough. When you stand rooted in self-awareness, you become untouchable, not because you closed your heart, but because you finally opened your eyes. So remember this: not everyone deserves access to you. Not everyone who smiles is safe. And not every hand that reaches out should be taken. The more you integrate your shadow, the more impossible it becomes for manipulators, narcissists, and competitors to take hold. Without raising your voice, without losing your kindness, you become the one thing they cannot influence: awake, whole, and impossible to trick.